My apologies to colleagues for the extra time it took to solve the technical difficulties. I turn now to Ranking Member Grassley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to air some disappointment that I have regarding the process of this hearing and underlying documents. When I was chairman of finance during the Biden investigation, I ensured that Ranking Member Wyden possessed investigative records as they were produced. I also ensured that Wyden's staff had access to the Trump Justice Department classified facility review records. Also, when I was ranking member of Judiciary last Congress, Chairman Durbin ensured that my staff possessed records during his Trump investigation. Those are examples of how I have handled investigation and what was expected over the decades. Regarding the matter before us today, since August of last year and at times after that, my staff have asked the majority staff about possessing records and whether they'd issue a report. My staff never received an answer. This past Sunday, 8 months after, we finally received a copy of these records. Those records were obtained from House Democrats. On Tuesday morning, the majority issued a joint staff report with House Democrats. The majority failed to inform the minority that they were working with House Democrats on a report. And the Washington Post published a story of this report before I received it from majority staff. So the majority gave the report to outside interests before giving it to members of the committee. The majority could have been transparent with the minority many months ago, as is normal course of business. The majority chose not to do so. This unfortunate series of non-transparent events have undone years of investigative precedent. And around here, I think process matters, equitable treatment matters. The majority has now created a new investigative precedent, and I will keep that in mind as my investigations move forward. Now to the work of today's hearing and the work of the Budget Committee and my usual comments about what the Budget Committee ought to be doing and how climate change does or does not work into it. But I always like to remind people about my efforts of alternative energy. 31 years ago, I was the author of the wind energy tax credit. So I was for a time called the father of the wind energy tax credit. I guess now I'm the grandfather of that tax credit. Anyway, that was before global warming and climate change became the big policy issue it was now. So I like to think of myself as being a little bit ahead of it. Now, for the 16th time, the Budget Committee is holding a hearing related to climate change rather than the nation's dismal fiscal outlook. As I've said in the previous 15 hearings, the Budget Committee ought to focus on the budget, plain and simple. While this committee continues to ignore our unprecedented deficit, they're top of mind. These are all top of mind of my constituents back in Iowa. Over the break, I held 10 county meetings. In each and every one, Iowans voiced their dismay at the state of our nation's finances. They're furious about the Congress's utter lack of attention to our bloated federal budget and that is as my constituents should be so concerned. Just last week, the Commerce Department released its economic update for the first quarter of 2024. This update obliterates the Biden administration's fake talking points on how strong the economy is and with inflation presumably contained, and it's not. The Fed's preferred measure of inflation ticked higher and now stands nearly double their 2% inflation target. At the same time, the economy grew far slower than expected, registering its weakest performance since first quarter 2022. The Fed now finds itself between a rock and a hard place. The economy is weak, but surging inflation requires the Fed to maintain interest rates higher for longer, risking an era of stagflation. Left unchecked, our mounting national debt will increasingly put upward pressure on interest rates and inflation. This spells disaster for our economy and for the consumer's pocketbook. Interest on the national debt is already projected to cost the federal government more this year than what's spent on national defense. Now, higher than previously expected interest rates could cost us hundreds of billions more in interest on the national debt. Meanwhile, hardworking Americans will find themselves priced out of the American dream of home ownership thanks to sky-high mortgage rates. At the same time, embedded inflation means that they'll find it increasingly hard to make ends meet. It's no wonder Iowans are frustrated with Washington, D.C.'s lack of attention to our nation's fiscal policy. So, yes, the Budget Committee should focus on the budget. Climate legislation isn't referred to the Budget Committee. This committee doesn't legislate climate change policy. Democrats would rather accuse oil companies of conspiracy and raise gas prices than work with Republicans to write a budget or acknowledge the unpopularity of many climate change policies. And all the EV cars sitting on dealer lots is one evidence of these policies just not moving as people here in Washington, D.C. thought they would. What's worse is they assume the American people who don't want expensive and burdensome climate regulations are too dumb to think for themselves. I can't say what the fossil fuel industry has or hasn't done, although I recently just saw it on the video given to this committee. Especially in the last 2 days, that is true that the Democrats have given me to review their thousands of pages of so-called evidence. But I have a long record of disagreeing with and tangling with big oil over various issues for 3 decades over ethanol as just one issue of alternative energy, and also disagreeing with big oil on tax policy. But it's also undeniable that the fossil fuels are critical to our energy security and the energy security of our allies, and we surely know it, how critical it is to China, because while we're cutting down on fossil fuel, they're building utility plants fired by coal quite regularly. We just appropriated $95 billion for a national security supplemental package to aid Ukraine to defend itself against Putin, also bolstering Taiwan's defenses to deter Chinese aggression and to restock Israel's air defense capabilities. I voted for this package. Also want to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Risch for the inclusion of your repo for Ukrainian Act in this package. I strongly support your efforts to ensure Russian assets are repurposed for Ukrainian humanitarian assistance and reconstruction. Our nation and our allies need a stable and secure fossil fuel supply to stand up to the world's authoritarian dictators. Demonizing fossil fuels in the name of climate change won't bolster our or our allies' national security. And this committee's failure to address our dire fiscal situation certainly won't help in that regard either. This is why I've invited two international energy experts to testify on the state of global energy security. So we welcome Dr. Cohen and Mr. Ratner. I hope your testimony turns this spectacle into a learning opportunity. And I welcome all of today's witnesses, including our colleague from the House of Representatives. And Mr. Chairman, because of finance, I'm going to be in and out of this hearing, so I can go across the hall and ask questions.
Understood. I thank my ranking member for his statement. We don't always agree, but I do always admire him.